It's always a pleasure to be back in Kigali. It's become one of my favorite places in the world to be, for obvious reasons, and I think everyone can testify to that. We have a very interesting session to share with you today on the connectivity story and picture for Africa. But before we go into the panel discussions, I thought it would be worthwhile setting the scene with a few facts and information about aviation, considering that we're combining hotels and aviation, which is a great initiative. It's important for us to be all on the same page and to get a common understanding. So, some facts. Every day, 10 million passengers are carried on over 100,000 flights through 3,883 airports, supported by 173 air navigation service providers, which we call ANSPs. There are over almost 27,000 aircraft in service and growing, etc., etc. In 2015, aviation carried 3.57 billion passengers, and by the end of this year, aviation would have carried 4.1 billion passengers. That is half of the world's population. And so I submit to you that aviation is mass transit. Now, what is the point of all this transport, moving people and goods and services from point A to Z? Well, we like to think that aviation is a facilitator for what, you might ask? Freedom. Aviation is what gives the world the freedom to connect. It's the only form of transportation that connects the world safely, quickly, within a 24-hour period, from any point on the earth to another. It is also the only form of transportation that allows so many other sectors and economic and social activities to happen. So the freedom to trade, the freedom to do business, the freedom for tourism, the freedom for adventure, freedom even to study in different parts of the world, to live and work in different parts of the world, and medical tourism as well. So aviation facilitates freedom, the freedom to live. And with this in mind, let's put the role of aviation, as outlined just now, into the context of Africa. What does aviation mean for Africa? Well, you've seen the slides from Daniel. You saw that particular slide that showed all of the different countries and places that you can fit into the landmass of Africa. It is true. And while we don't have robust alternative infrastructure, like a railway from Cape Town to Cairo, or a highway from Ethiopia to Dakar, we have to do something to connect the continent. Yesterday, during the AviaDev session, the gentleman Theodore Chikelu, the CEO of Jet Afrique, he said that aviation has to take a quantum leap to fill that gap. And that is why we think that aviation is Africa's lifeline. And let's remind ourselves of the facts and figures we've heard over the past 2 days up until now. The demographics, the 1.2 billion people, the passenger numbers that are forecasted to grow by almost 3 times between now and 2035. The projected annual growth we've seen already, which will, again, is quite robust and continuous over the next 20 years. 6 of the 13 fastest growing economies being here in Africa. We saw some of the countries specified in Daniel's slide. The young population, the growing middle class, and the opportunity for trade intra-Africa. So because of this, aviation really does play a critical role. And it's important for us to understand that for it to really do what it's supposed to do, what it has the potential to do, we must have connectivity. Connectivity is what underpins this whole picture. And the final thing I want to leave with you in terms of those demographics is this graph here that shows the projected growth over the next 20 years. And so, in the context of the landmass, the need for Africa to connect within itself, the demographics that are positive on the whole, and the projected future growth, we do need connectivity. But this is the picture of connectivity in Africa today. You can see where there there's density where we have a few hubs on the edges in Addis Ababa, in Nairobi, Johannesburg, Morocco, Casablanca, etc. And you can also see where we don't have such density. And ladies and gentlemen, I think that this presents opportunity. And that's why the whole conversation about air connectivity is so important. Because if we are able to connect, then all of the other enablers and all the other issues that underpin connectivity, hotel, accommodation, trade, tourism, will all improve if that connectivity picture improves. And so, what did we do? Somebody said to me on the bus yesterday as we were going for the party, I am tired of hearing about Yamoussoukro. For those of you who are from the hotel industry and don't know what Yamoussoukro is, it is the framework agreement that supports and promotes intra-Africa connectivity through improved air services. And for many years, not much had happened about Yamoussoukro. So we galvanized ourselves, in collaboration with some partners, the African Union, the African Airlines Association, and said, what can we do about this? And we said, well, people respond to facts and figures. If you're able to present a compelling argument to say why it's important for Africa to connect, rather than focusing on why it hasn't, then perhaps we can change the narrative and get some action behind it. So we did a 12-country study, looking at 12 countries, key markets in the continent. If they were to open their markets to each other, what would happen? And it was fascinating. First, if we had that liberalization, it would lead to new routes and frequencies, shorter travel times, I'm sure, which is music to the ears of many people here, and lower fares, leading to air traffic growth, increased tourism, inward investment, increased trade, and ultimately increased GDP, job creation, and general economic benefits. And what that study translated into in real terms is that there would be an additional incremental 1.3 billion in GDP amongst the 12 countries, an additional 155,000 jobs created amongst those 12 countries, and a 75% increase in direct air services, fare savings of 25 to 35%, time savings, greater convenience, and perhaps one of the most important things, an additional 5 million passengers would be able to fly. Why? Because there will be lower fares. And many people are price sensitive who travel across Africa, whether by road or rail or air. And so this is important. And there's several things that have to happen, but the one I want to highlight on this slide, in order for us to continue to improve the connectivity picture of Africa, is the multi-sector synergies and collaboration. And it now gives me pleasure to invite our panelists for today, starting with David King of WESGRO. Round of applause, please. And next we have Colonel Chance Ndagano, the CEO of RwandAir. And finally, Olivier Granet, who is with AccorHotels, the Managing Director and Chief Operating Officer. Thank you very much. So, gentlemen, having heard all that, and with all the discussions we had today already, and what we had yesterday, for those of us who were at the AviaDev session, we've talked about it. Affordability is an issue. And bringing the issue of travel to intra-Africa travel. Africans travel for work and to trade. And price is a factor. Market segmentation is an issue. So I'd like to hear from you first, Colonel Chance, what you're doing in RwandAir to think about this issue, how you segment your market, how you're planning for the future, and how you're planning to attract those who are currently not flying today, who are trading or transporting themselves by road when they could easily be doing the same thing by air. And then perhaps we could also hear from Olivier what you're doing in terms of accommodation for these kinds of categories of travelers, and what your plans are for the future. Over to you.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Quickly, before I take your question, I just wish to recap quickly on the task of the airline, our RwandAir, our career. So one of our tasks, major tasks actually, is to improve connectivity on the continent. Connectivity in Africa, we've seen some gaps. Most countries are landlocked. So the only other alternative we have is to introducing the aviation or an airline. If we try to analyze how the industry is performing, what are the challenges of the industry, what do we need to put in place, what are the strategies, the industry, aviation industry in Africa actually is lacking the foundation, the major base of the airline. So the base of aviation or the airline is basically having all the capabilities of to support the airline. What do I mean by that? If you look at the trainings that is done before maybe you can qualify a pilot, before you can qualify an engineer, it takes time, it takes a long time. If you look at the airports, most of our airports are not appropriate. If you look at the standards, European standards, they require us to have category 2 airports in order to. So, holistically, if we need to improve on this industry, we need to put a lot of things in place so that the industry can be dynamic and start moving. So one of the areas that we need to be focused by the region, by the continent, and by the states is at least training specialists, the pilots, the engineers. If you look at the experience required to have an engineer on an Airbus, it takes more than 10 years to produce such a. So we need to look ahead and see where are we taking aviation, where are we taking the industry, what do we need to do? So one of the other areas that also need to be put into place, also policies. What policies that are needed to be put into place, especially in the liberalization, open skies. Rwanda is also doing well on that. Rwanda was one of the first countries which assigned the open skies policy. If you look at the visa issue, Rwanda gives you a visa on arrival, especially for Africans. If you look at also, you can apply online. So those are some of the important issues that are improving our connectivity on the continent.
Excellent.
Then if you go to on the side of the airline, what are we doing also to improve the connectivity and what maybe incentives they also need to see? So what we are doing as an airline, we are trying to increase our network all the time, which also ultimately will increase the connectivity. So recently we opened the hub in Benin so that the West African market is also served. We are flying now 25 destinations, including 22 in Africa and then 3 beyond Africa. So basically, the incentives to improve on this in the aviation is basically governments to own this industry, regions to own the industry, Africa to have some policies together so that we can improve the industry. Aviation is another stimulant. You mentioned is the stimulant of our economy. If you look at the people who are attached on the industry, look at the insurance, look at the maintenance, look at the catering, look at the hotels, look at everything. So everything revolves around the industry. So it is a very big stimulant of the economy, and we need to do something to improve the connectivity. And we need more incentives from the government. We need the proper policies from the continent and from regions, and we need to work together with different governments to understand the challenges. Fifth freedom, rights, traffic rights needs to be some places, traffic lights are not automatic. So we need to sensitize these governments to make them aware that if we need to improve connectivity, then we need to have these policies right and then in place. So that's quickly what I can recap on this.
Very good. And just quickly on the market segmentation issue, in terms of the passengers you're trying to attract, how are you targeting the different demographics that we've outlined already, particularly those people who currently are not flying today?
Yeah, the way we are trying to encourage the different sectors on our airline is about the fares. Okay, airlines just is moved by the fares. If we open up a route, we put the lowest fare so that people get to know their brand, get to understand what you're doing, and then when the market starts maturing, then we can also adjust on the fares. So one of the approaches we are doing is about the fares, and then opening more routes so that people know our routes, then more marketing. So it revolves around that. That's what we are doing so that we attract more people on our planes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Olivier?
Well, this question of market segmentation, we really see it as a key opportunity for growth. You have today in Africa a number of key conference centers, such we are today, and this is in fact what we call the initial phase of development. When you want to exist on the map, you need to attract some conference, you need to attract some business travel in order to exist, and you do it usually with some upscale property. What we are looking at is at the next phase, and the next phase is to focus and to create the domestic network and to ensure that you are providing the attractive offer for the domestic market. And that's what we are looking at. We generate tremendous opportunities covering all market segments, from economy to luxury, with, of course, a clear differentiation and segmentation regarding different market segments. So the last two, we today are already present in every market segment. The last two openings that we had in Africa, it's the conversion of an existing property in Nairobi that will become EB style. And we also opened Fairmont in Marrakesh. So targeting segments which are very different and different part of Africa. So we believe that this connectivity is the key success factor to be able to develop the domestic market. Today, already 60% of the guests in our hotel, we have more than 100 hotels, more than 20,000 rooms in the continent. 60% of the guests are based in Africa, traveling from one place to another. And our expectation is that this figure will continue to grow. So for us, connectivity is also connectivity to this young population, very well connected. You have 300 million, you have 150 million users of mobile pay solutions. So we have to adapt to this reality, and there is an expectation of this young middle class traveling of getting all the level of quality and brand standard that we have in all other markets.
It's a great point. I think it's important to highlight the fact that, other markets, if we're looking at aviation growth, have become somewhat saturated, so Europe and North America. And these markets are looking to Africa for their expansion plans. China, they don't really need anybody, do they? So they're fine on their own, but these other markets are looking to Africa as well for expansion, and so even though we have quite a robust population within Africa that can actually meet the needs or the hotel demands going forward, it's also important to think about what the future is going to portend, because you have the domestic market in terms of Pan-Africa, and then you have an increasing international market, because these markets are strategically expanding inward. So let's talk about infrastructure. On this point of growth and things are moving forward, obviously it has a critical role to play. We have the physical infrastructure of accommodation, but the airports themselves, that's a key factor that's directly connected to bringing in the passengers, whether they're businessmen and women or tourists or leisure, whatever. So the airports are critical to that. Now, what do you think that airports can do to continue to boost passenger inflows into their airport, and by extension into the communities around them?
Thank you for the question. I think airports are starting to realize that it's not just about bringing a passenger to the airport and getting them out as quickly as possible.
Yep.
It's becoming a customer experience, and it's becoming a total value chain. I think from landing at the airport, going through immigration, which is the first contact point, very important to have the right people there, the soft skills, because if you have that bad experience the first time you get to the airport, you might not come back. You might not want to go back to that country. So I think it starts right when that plane lands. But in terms of the infrastructure, it's going wider than just the airport precinct nowadays. We're talking about an airport city. We're talking about the concept of aerotropolises. And I think that's where we're heading in the future, especially in Africa. You want that total experience when you get to the airport. You can shop there, you can stay there if you want. The hotel groups invest in airport infrastructure as well. And I think that's where the total picture comes in. And then also your connections into the city, very important. Your transport, your roads, your buses, having your trains. In Africa, obviously not that well developed yet, but I think we're starting to realize that that is becoming much more important now, because if you're sitting in traffic for 2 hours getting to where you want to go, it's not a great experience. So I think airports are realizing that they have to look wider than just the airport precinct, and they have to involve all the role players, the airlines and the hotels to, get the perfect customer experience.
Yeah, but from an investment point of view, I mean, these sort of normal ways of building airports, what has become the new normal, I should say, which is what you've mentioned, the airport cities, the fantastic experiences you have with them. We can't always have that, though. And we can't always have that in Africa in particular. And again, on the issue of segmentation, I mean, what do you think we should be looking at for the future? Should we be thinking about, for example, 3 kilometers of runway and maybe a container plaza that has the facilities that are needed, that are clean and neat and nice, but that you don't have to break the bank to build a whole city around it? Because if you think about it, there's many remote areas. We've talked about the people who can't really afford to travel, who can't spend so much money, etc. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, that's an interesting concept, and I think it could be totally true. If you want to make travel more affordable, you don't have to invest in all of this, fancy infrastructure. But again, I think if you get to the airport and you say it's not clean or it's not the place you want to be, then you won't travel there again. So people want the extras. I think all customers want that little bit extra. They want the, gift that you get on the plane. They want the in-flight entertainment system. And I think it's the same at airports nowadays. They want the shopping experience. They want to be able to do everything there. But in Africa, maybe for now, instead of convenience, we might just look at, getting the volumes coming, and then through that, trying to expand and to build the airports into a world-class destination.
Thank you. And Chance, what do you think about the concept of the hubbing? I know that you're trying to do that, not just with your primary hub here, but you mentioned a secondary hub that you're opening up in Benin. Yeah. What do you think, what advice do you have for other states in terms of how to replicate this model and how to go about it quickly, efficiently and affordably?
Yeah, thank you so much. Before maybe I tackle that, I need also to mention something more on the infrastructure my colleague has just mentioned. If you look at the passenger projections in Africa, numbers will keep increasing. If you write from 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, these numbers will keep on doubling. So if you do that projection and then you look at the infrastructure you have in place in terms of airports, in terms of runway, in terms of the terminal buildings, in terms of the counters, everything is going to be overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. So I think what you need countries need to do also is to have that projection and then start putting the infrastructure in place that will cater for this. If you look at a number of countries in Africa, they are trying to expand their capacity. If you look at Rwanda itself, we are going to expand into Bugesera, which is going to cater for that passenger volumes. If you go look at Benin, they are also planning to put up a new airport. If you look at to Senegal, they are also putting up a new airport, which is going to cater for such a capacity. Now, if I come back now to the hub, if you look at the how we need to connect Africa, then we need to have more capable hubs. If RwandAir am to fly in West Africa, originating here and then operating in West Africa and come back, it becomes more expensive. So if you take your aircraft into that hub, then you serve that market. When you have everything based there, aircraft based there, then you have few shorter flight times, 1 hour, 30 minutes, other than maybe flying 6 hours. What does that mean? So in terms of cost, if I'm flying shorter, burning less fuel, then I'm going to reduce my fare. So then customers, passengers, population will benefit because of the fares. So also in terms of stimulating the economy, if you take the infrastructure there, you position people there, hotels there, everything there, then service providers there, those who are doing ground handling, security, catering, then everything is going to be stimulated. And at the end of it, the countries are benefiting. So that's why the concept of hub is going to also reduce our cost. And then when the cost of an airline reduces, also the fares we also have to reduce, and who benefits the population. And then also, we also go to that country and then stimulate the economy there. That's the advantage I see in this opening up the hubs. Yeah.
Olivier, in terms of an innovative approach, perhaps? Do you see a future where hotels, as an industry, interface with airlines and aviation as an industry in terms of investment opportunities, where you're both investing in each other?
You have a traditional way to look at it, how hotels and airlines work together, and then you have a number of partnership, and it's usually about earn and burn of points with the loyalty program. So this exists, and this will continue and will be developed. But as you mentioned, I believe that if we look at what is at stake in Africa, we have to be far more innovative and to look beyond. A lot of figures have been presented this morning, but what struck me the most is 58 million visitor tourists last year, which is less than what we have in France or Spain. And this is 3% of the worldwide traffic. So there is obviously a lot to do. And this is about communication, and this is about experience. How to create destination, how to communicate on destination. This is something between hotel and airlines, and I believe also to involve the local authorities and the tourism board, and this is something that has to be done in common. So just to give an example of a challenge that we had in Middle East, which is how to attract some guests in summer in Dubai, which is not so easy. And we had a partnership with the Dubai Tourism Office, with Emirates, with AccorHotels on to communicate to all our loyal members. We have a base of 100 million loyal members, and they fly with Emirates. They get a draw every week, and when they come to Dubai, you have some winner, and then they can get a trip, fly Emirates, staying in AccorHotels, and getting some free entrance to new theme park in Dubai. Just as example, but that's things that are going a little bit beyond the traditional way, and I'm sure that in Africa, and again with this young population looking for something new, different, there is a lot to do.
Okay, good. We have a few minutes left, so let's turn to our audience. Any thoughts on what you've heard so far? Any questions for the panelists before we hear their final words? Okay, so finally, I think if you could just share with us your thoughts on, this future landscape, this positive future that we have for Africa, for African travel, for African tourism, and for African accommodation along this supply chain. What are your thoughts, and what would be the one recommendation that you would share with the audience as a leave-away?
I think just following on from what Olivier said, my two thoughts would be, the first one is the partnerships that is established, and we've done that now in Cape Town with our Air Access Initiative, where we have, the government, the private sector, South African tourism, the local tourism, and the hotel groups on board in creating the space for air development in Cape Town. So attracting routes to Cape Town is a partnership in that sense.
Good.
For Africa itself, I think it's all about the liberalization of the skies, but unfortunately for now, we still have some, people call it managed liberalization, so everyone's trying to protect their ground, but I think we have to think further, and we have to really create that connectivity in Africa.
Very good.
Maybe quickly I can link up by mentioning maybe what plans, what strategies RwandAir is trying to put in place in order to address these issues of connectivity. If you look at our strategy, we continue growing, and then as we grow, we also expand our network, which also ultimately improve our connectivity. Of course, also offering competitive prices to our passengers, so that all sectors are able to be assisted on that. Then also we are trying also to look at the state-of-art technology that we can include in our plane in order to attract more, give comfort to our passengers, then also attract more passengers so that we have an edge with our competitors. You know, if you need to survive in a competition, you also need to have an edge. So we're looking at the state-of-art technology so that we have things like Wi-Fi on board, in-flight entertainment, then also price-wise, we look at how we can adjust our prices. Looking at the market, looking at the sector, looking at the routes by route, not just generalize and say, oh, somebody to fly here needs paid. No, we just look at the route specific, look at the segment of the population, look at the people in Rwanda here, like people, Rwandese who fly to our domestic flights, they have a subsidized price, they have a better price for that. So that's why we are looking at that segment of the population. Creation, of course, of a hub, as we did, is one also of the easy way of trying to reduce on the fares. Then continue building robust base for our airlines, train more pilots, train more technicians, then have everything in place, including also some infrastructure hangars, then our maintenance organization, so that we survive in this environment, also helping the different segments of the population. Thank you
very much. Olivier?
Today you have a large number of cities with more than 1 million inhabitants in Africa, and you have a very limited number of cities in Africa with occupancy rate for hotel reaching, let's say, at least 60%, and it's very limited. We are very confident on the fact that once you have the right hotel infrastructure covering different segments, once you have the right connectivity with the airlines, because it's about the experience, then we'll give good reason for visitor to come not only for a business trip, but to come back with the family, to enjoy the experience, and to develop a client which is not only based on business, but also with some tourism. And we are very confident that that will be then a very key success factor to develop the attractivity of a lot of key cities in Africa.
Excellent. Well, you heard it, ladies and gentlemen. Connectivity underpins everything. Connectivity in the skies, connectivity on the ground, and connectivity amongst the sectors. Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you for your attention.